Welcome to the Putting the Public into Health podcast by Dr. Richard Pan. As we face one of the greatest public health disasters in the century, this podcast will address questions and issues from you, the public, about the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on people's health and lives. I am Dr. Richard Pan. I'm a physician with a background in public health, and I'm proud to represent the people of Sacramento, Elk Grove, West Sacramento, and parts of Sacramento County in the California State Senate. I want to share with you important information and stories to help each other during this difficult time. To slow the spread of COVID-19, stay-at-home orders have stopped dining in restaurants and only allowed pickup or delivery. I am pleased to have one of Sacramento's leading chefs, Patrick Mulvaney, join me today. Patrick owns Mulvaney's B&L, which defined locavore dining, and he's a leader in the Farm to Fork movement. He and his wife, Bobbin, have supported and led numerous efforts to improve our community, and I am honored to have been in the same American Leadership Forum class with Patrick. Thank you so much for joining me, Patrick.
Good morning, Dr. Pan. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Well, let's just start off by telling me why you became a chef and how you went about starting Mulvaney's B&L.
Well, I graduated with a degree in English that qualified me to be a waiter in Manhattan. And, I was lost in my early 20s, and I started to realize that a restaurant would be what I wanted to have. I went to Europe to do an apprenticeship to learn how to cook just a little bit. And the 9 months I was over there turned me into a cook, and I came back and never stopped. And was in New York for many years, over in Arizona. At one point, I thought about getting out and going into academia. I came to UC Davis to go to graduate school in food science, and didn't particularly care for grad school. I'm not an academician, as you know, and I fell in love, though, the year I was here with everything that grows here, right? That we have a 12-month growing season, that you get to meet the farmers, the ranchers, the winemakers, the brewers, and it's all right here. So as a cook, I could think of no better sandbox to play in than right here in Sacramento. 20 years ago, that was everyone kind of looked at me and said, "What, are you crazy? What's in Sacramento, tomatoes?" But now we're the Farm to Fork capital, and everyone's starting to come back to us.
Well, that's fabulous, and we're certainly quite fortunate to have you here in Sacramento and your vision of food here. Now that we have COVID-19, how has COVID-19 affected your restaurant and your employees?
So that last week before the shutdown order, we kept seeing our catering business next door in the banquet hall had really cratered towards the end of February, early March, as people were becoming more cautious. And that last week that the restaurant was still open, it seemed that every decision we made to make sure that our guests and staff were safe was moot by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So a morning decision was done by the afternoon. So it became clear on the second Saturday that it was time to shut down the restaurant and decide how to move forward from there.
So basically, even before the stay-at-home orders, it was quite evident to you and your team that something was going to need to be done, right?
Yeah, we had the discussion internally, one by one, with folks during that last week about what it might look like, and then we took the weekend off. Because we had been making, like I said, because the decisions that we made had changed so much, on that Saturday, what I said to everybody was, let's go home, and let's come in on Monday and sit around and talk about it, because we're behind the curve, we're missing the wave, so let's think about what's going on so that if we make a decision on Monday, we're ahead, we're riding the wave rather than trailing behind it. And when we came in, we all knew that it was the right thing to do for everyone to shut down. And I think the governor shut down that day as well. So,
now, your restaurant also, of course, not only has employees, you also do business with farmers and other businesses. How's the pandemic affected them from your perspective?
And so we thought about that, right, as we started to say, well, what do we do now that the restaurant's not open? To-go food wasn't really we didn't see that as a pivot because we had 54 employees, and to-go would only bring back 3 or 4, and how many would come back? The other issue that we saw was all our distributors were losing all that business. All the small farmers that we have out in the fields that surround us had all these crops that they couldn't use. And what were we going to do? And so that combination of antsy chefs, empty restaurants, and fields full of food led us to say, hey, we know there's hunger out there. Let's make some food and see where it goes. Really driven by the schools, right? As you know, Sacramento City has 75% of their kids are on free and reduced lunch. Mm-hmm. So they're tasked with 225,000 meals a week for kids. So those first weeks, as we talked to them, it was clear that they were just so nervous. The last thing you want if you're a chef and you're busy in a kitchen is for someone to ask you how they can help, right? The answer is, if you can't figure it out, just get away from me. That's how you can help. So we kind of talked to them and then said, okay, we're going to give you a little time to settle in, but let's think about it. We knew from their work, they had a principal who said, people aren't going to come to the school to get food, but I know where they live, follow me. And they took the principal, they followed him, and in 20 minutes they'd given out more food at the apartment complexes than they had all day. So that made me say, hey, we know community elders can distribute this food. So we just started making 400 meals a day, right, 100 bags that had 4 meals in them, and called our friends Daryl Roberts up in North Sac and then Father Francisco at Our Lady of Guadalupe to say, can you take 200 meals a day? And they said, yep, absolutely. And Daryl took him back to his center in North Sac first, but then said, I want to take it everywhere. So he's been taking them to CV Circle and to Grant High School and down on MLK and all to centers all around the city where the need is great. After a week, then the schools were back where they had their rhythm going, and we started to engage with those guys as well to say, we'll be able to offer bags. And I got to tell you, Richard, that when you're at Luther Burbank and there's 1,700 people coming, the cars just lined up. We're bringing 50 bags or 75 bags, and it's a lot of food, but it's not enough, right? At Fern Bacon last week, our 200 meals were gone in 15 minutes. So we know that the need is there. So, and then the other piece that happened is, as this happened, there was money available for seniors too, right? Because that's the other population who's in jeopardy. And so with Meals on Wheels in the city of Sacramento, we were able to start a feeding program with those guys, kind of modifying our 4 meals in a box to a day or to 2 days worth of meals for shut-in seniors with sundry bags, right, to give them some toilet paper and granola and snacks, and started doing that as well. So probably there are 5 restaurants in town, Camden and Cannon and Alora, Bincho Yaki, have been pitching in with this as well. So we feed 800 seniors every week. And that program that we saw started to spread because we knew the chef's initial thought is, let's bring everyone together, right? Brian Kuznicki said, come to Golden One. We have a big kitchen. We have nothing going on. Help us. But because of COVID and social distancing, that wasn't the solution. But the solution, it turns out, for us was 400 to 800 meals in our restaurant in a way that we were practicing social distancing by having shifts of people coming in to cook, coming in to pack, coming in to distribute, so that everyone was separate and everyone was safe because we're chefs. We're cognizant of food safety issues, making sure that the food that went out was ready to eat, though heat and eat could be good, and the system started to work. And that's when the governor got wind of what we were doing and came in and said, how are you doing this? And we have a lot of seniors out here that need to be fed. And so today we've started Great Plates Delivered, and there are 30 restaurants in Sacramento who are doing 50 or 60 packages a day, and we deliver breakfast, lunch, and dinner to eligible seniors throughout Sacramento City, and then starting soon throughout the county. And we hope to keep spreading it. I have a phone call here that I have to get in touch with folks out in Marin as soon as I finish this to spread the word.
Wow, that's fantastic. So you told us a lot about how you reached out to different people and figured out how do they get the food delivered and so forth. And as you pointed out, there are lines of people. People are hungry. Many people have lost their jobs, other income, and people are going hungry. Tell me about how you reached out to your colleagues in the restaurant community, the other chefs, mobilize people to try to get more food. And then also, certainly, it's great that people are doing this. Can you maybe speak to what the benefits are, in addition to feeding people, of this kind of a program where we're mobilizing restaurants to be able to provide food to people in need?
In the population of ANSI cooks that we were concerned about were folks who are undocumented, because they don't, though they pay for unemployment insurance, they are not eligible to receive it. And although they are eligible for FMLA or other government programs, they will not, from fear, access them. So for us, the first piece was, wow, the safety net for these people who are really the backbone of our economy. And then, knowing that that percentage of undocumented workers is even higher in the fields, we wanted to make sure that we were buying food from our friends, the farmers, to make sure that those people had money coming in so they could still employ the farm workers. Don't get me wrong, self-interest here for sure, right? Because we know that when it's time to open back up, there's going to be a need for restaurants, and we want to make sure that our friends who have been so good to us over the last 20 years will be open and ready to help us when we come in. Chefs, like I said, chefs just like to do things, right? So that was a no-brainer to say, we don't want to sit around. How can we help? What can we do? And how can we bring in all this extra food? Now, when we started, there was no real money, right? We started on the bet that eventually relief efforts would catch up and find us. You know, I told someone we were just running and hoping they'd come up with a baton with some support. And so the beginning, truthfully, was support on donations. And Cisco and Sacramento, primarily among them, have just been great. But everybody, all the farmers and ranchers came in and said, here's food that we can't use, that we can't sell. Let's go, right? You can use it. And so that donation was generous. And then setting up spot funds, right? And quite frankly, I stand corrected, right? I thought that it wasn't really going to be enough to help. But the truth is that in the last 8 weeks, we've raised enough to make over 80,000 meals just from the generosity of the people of Sacramento.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
So it's been that continues to be true, right? That people are still continuing to reach out to us, but now with the money that's coming from FEMA, as the government said, hopefully the USDA and other programs, right, with help with people like you and others in the Capitol to help figure out what this world is, right? You know, we had a little joke when we first started talking about it, and talking about this with policymakers who said, well, how are you going to get the food in? How do you prepare the food? How does it get packaged? How does it? And the chefs in the room just kind of laughed and said, this is what we do for a living. Right. We're going to buy the food from the people we always buy the food from. We're going to wrap it with packaging from the people we always buy packaging from. We're going to put it in ways that's safe and tasty and healthy for you to eat. All we're asking you to do is take it out and give it to the people who are in need. Right. So, and likewise, that's why we came, the partnership was great, because you guys are the ones who can say, here's where the funds are available. Here's how we can get to yes and figure out a way that we can spend them. So that today, 800 seniors now have a full day's meals in their house right now because of programs like the governor's.
Yeah, well, I certainly want to thank you for your leadership and innovation, because we get money from FEMA or from other sources. They said, well, we want people to get fed, but we don't know how to go about doing it. And sometimes, government's approach is, well, let's find some contractor to take care of the problem. We'll hand them the money, right? But then we were able to see what you and the other chefs were doing and saying, well, what we should do is support what you're doing, right? Because you're not only feeding people, which is certainly our ultimate goal, it's also supporting a very important ecosystem of food and dining that we need to be sure that we protect as we move forward, so that when things recover, people continue to have their jobs, that businesses are continue to be sustained, and being able to channel this money this way, I think has been something that has been a win-win.
Yes, and I think it's. I don't think that you can undercount the backroom voice of the Secretary of Food and Agriculture. That Karen Ross has been a big champion of making sure that all farmers, right, from small to large, come out of this as best they can. In conversations with her, it's been because some of our medium farmers, as it turns out, have turned to CSA boxes. So some of the farmers that I was most afraid were going to be hurt actually are doing okay because their neighbors, who are a little bit larger, are saying to them, I'll buy your crops because my business has gone up 20 or 30%. So they're safe. And I had the conversation with the secretary to say, who's hurting, right? And so it's the larger, medium-sized farms, I suppose. The big farms are still going to the grocery stores, right? And their supply chain hasn't been interrupted. But it's the medium ones who we don't necessarily talk to on a face-to-face basis who have been challenged. So having the power and the help of the Department of Food and Ag has certainly been a great help in this project as well. That's
great. Now, in addition to feeding people, you are also a leader in raising awareness of mental health issues in the restaurant industry. I know you were doing this before COVID was coming around. And, of course, we just talked about how restaurants have been particularly impacted by COVID-19. What do you see as a leader in mental health in terms of issues that will need to be addressed in the industry now with COVID and into the future?
So I'm actually kind of heartened by the whole thing in terms of mental health, because we started this, the restaurant was closed down, nothing worse than having to tell over 50 people who you promised meaningful employment to that they no longer have a job. Mm-hmm. And as we started to pivot during that first week, someone called me and said, oh, Mr. Mental Health Big Shot, now there's a new shiny bauble called COVID-19 and you don't pay attention to this anymore. I said, please leave me alone. I'm busy. But I looked, realized the reason it bothered me was because they were right. Was I paying attention? So I started to go back and look. And what I saw in our staff, because we've been working on mental health, on creating an environment where it's okay to not be okay, where it's important to talk about how you're feeling over the last 2 years, that our staff was automatically doing it. That on our thread of communication text threads, that people, I could see them checking in on those who we suspected to be most vulnerable. That when I sat down with our leadership team those first Mondays to sit down, that the first topic of conversation was, how are people, right? And saying, hey, have you checked in on this person? Have you checked in on that person? No, we're going to split up the entire staff to make sure we physically call them. Today is Thursday, so we have everybody coming in for a weekend family meal so we can actually see them, see how they're doing, and check in. So we know it's fascinating because what we've been doing for 2 years, we're seeing it pay off right in front of our eyes, which has been really good. And then it leads me to say now, as I reach out to my friends and colleagues, that this is an important part, right? That as we reach out as leaders, that we need to continue to see whether everyone's okay. And rather just, are you okay? Yes, I'm not bleeding, move on. That just needs to be a deeper conversation and question. And you can see it, right, in the public health issues that are coming up. Mm-hmm. So where I get hope from is that people will say, wow, this is one of the consequences of the COVID-19, right, is that we saw what happens to people who are shut off. We're going to start to account for mental stress and anxiety, right? So you can talk about stress and anxiety in the abstract, but now the entire country has been shut down and exposed to this. So as we come out and start to talk about the stresses that we have in our job, or the stresses that you have as a politician, everybody can be empathetic, right? When we started, and some people said to me, no one's going to listen to you telling someone how to be smarter or more in tune with their feelings about mental health. For us, the real truth is that we had 15 suicides in 2018 in hospitality. And that in particular, when Noah Zonka, the chef from the kitchen, when he passed away, everybody was upset. And everybody saw in my shop how affected I was by my good friend of over 20 years who we let slip away and couldn't do anything about. And so when I came back to them to say, this is what mental health is, and I don't want another Noah Zonka to happen, and I want to make sure that we are in touch as best we can be. We're not going to be 100%, but we're going to make a darn good effort at trying to get as many people to know that they're important to us as we can. That rather than just something that I was saying because it was in a script or a book, they saw the pain, right, behind the eyes, right? And so there was a much greater buy-in. So my hope then is as we move forward that people will start to talk about mental health. that it will become more of a public issue, because I know that now everybody in our country has been exposed in one way or another to the ideas of anxiety, depression, or separation.
Well, thank you so much for your leadership in this field, and I think the resiliency that you've been able to build in people before COVID is certainly paying off now, but certainly there's going to be more work to be done into the future. So thank you so very much, Patrick.
Yep.
Now, you're in the restaurant industry. We're hoping that we're going to get our public health interventions in place so we can start lifting some of the stay-at-home orders. There's talk about letting restaurants do some in-house dining, except we'll have people outside. People talk about, even if when we lift things, we'll still have to maintain distances within restaurants. Of course, I think takeout and delivery are probably still going to be major elements. So what do you see as the future of the restaurant industry and restaurants like yours as we are having to live with COVID?
So we see moving forward, again, I just stress that the value of the restaurant as, in some ways, the center of the community, that doesn't change, and people will come back. And when people say, what does it look like? I go and say, I don't know. Right, and that's when I say, think back 8 weeks, and what did California look like 8 weeks ago? So for me to say what it's going to look like 8 weeks from now, I think that's, I don't think anyone has that crystal ball, and if they do, certainly wish they would share it with me. So I think that what we're going to do is what restaurants have always done, is be resilient, right, and be nimble, to be open to those ideas. So I was really heartened by Congressman Berra and the mayor and Councilman Hanson presenting the idea of closing streets off in Sacramento for outdoor dining, perhaps here at the B&L to be able to use the sidewalk so that people are outside, right? Dr. Berra said that the incidence of infection is so much less when people are outdoors. Mm-hmm. So we can see that as a way to build back, right? But we want to make sure that we build back safely, right? And how do we do it in a way that's responsible for our clients, and mostly for our staff, right? How do we make sure that our staff, and now for me, soon to be my new grandchild, how do we make sure that she's going to be safe in this world? And so we'll take those steps, right, one by one, right? We're going to lean on public health leaders like you to say what's good, what's bad, and hopefully it'll be a conversation, right? That between, and you'll have two of those hats, right? You'll have the public health hat to say, here's what's safe, and here's what we'd like to do, and the political hat to say, here's how we get the message out to the public. And then the hospitality industry, I think our place is going to be to say, hey, and here's how we can make it work, right? And you know, you've seen, right, that in 8 weeks we've gone from a white tablecloth restaurant serving individual plates to a few customers a day to making 800 meals a day that go out. So we are ready to pivot, and we are ready to be nimble and ready to be of service.
Right. Well, thank you so very much, Patrick, for your leadership and your innovation here in Sacramento and actually beyond. I know you're a national leader in many ways. And again, I want to thank you so much for your time and joining me for this podcast. And I want to thank all our listeners for listening to this episode of Putting the Public into Health by Dr. Richard Pan. If you have questions or ideas for a future podcast, please email them to senator.pan@senate.ca.gov. Please stay at home as much as possible, stay at least 6 feet away from others outside, wash your hands frequently, and try not to touch your face. Together, we're slowing the spread of the disease and saving lives. Thank you so much for listening.